Hello and welcome to the Rabyd Atheist. I'm Rabyd, a former pastor turned atheist, now a compassionate anti-theist. Welcome to my channel. Like and share this video. Join the Rabyd Nation, a nation of people dedicated to normalizing atheism and deconversion by hitting the subscribe button. And if you want to support the channel in a more tangible way, hit the join button, and your membership options that lead to citizenship in the Rabyd Nation will be presented to you. It's been a while since I responded to Father Casey's letter to atheists, and it's always fun to see another guy cosplaying Star Wars characters, but I'm more of a Sith fan than a Jedi fan, but to each their own. Today, though, I want to look at a video I stumbled on about Casey's Is There Proof God Exists? Yes video. And I had to see what was up because it is an atheist-related issue. So without further ado, let's have Father Casey introduce the topic.
Around the world, literally billions of people believe in some form of a God, an all-knowing, all-powerful creator of everything in existence, absolutely confounding atheists.
I am not confounded. I actually understand why people believe in God, as I used to be a believer myself. But just because a whole bunch of people believe in something doesn't mean it's true. For me, I am not confounded by belief. I just don't have any myself. I also happen to be an anti-theist, as I believe that the belief in God is actually counter to human progress. It keeps us engaged in wishful thinking and wasting time and resources on an unproven belief. So I do believe it would be better if we dropped the belief in God or gods or the superstitions. That way, anything that we don't have any evidence for those beliefs, we should probably do without them and would be better off without them.
You believe in something that you can't see, hear, or touch, of which there is no physical evidence of in the entire universe? Yeah.
Yeah, so you admit there's a problem of scientific evidence. That's good. Something that is invisible and cannot be touched and has no evidence for it, yeah, that would make it non-existent to most people. But we somehow have this special case when it comes to God and other deities. But yeah, those things would help God's existence along and his credibility along if they actually existed. But thankfully, you admit that they don't, so we can hopefully just skip ahead.
Only for Catholics, this does not mean that God is the result of some wishful thinking or illogical fallacies. We believe that there is not only evidence for God's existence found in the accounts of sacred scripture, personal prayer, and private revelations, but actual proofs, philosophical arguments that logically point to the existence of a God. What are these proofs, and what does it mean for our faith? This is Catholicism in Focus. In the absence of verifiable scientific evidence for God, theologians and philosophers have turned to logical arguments to prove God's existence for centuries. Sometimes you don't have to see something to know it exists. While the arguments are many and varied, and not all of them are particularly helpful, each of these arguments can be grouped into one of four categories of approaches: cosmological, ontological, moral, and theological.
Now, first of all, none of the things that you initially listed is proof for God anyway, as they all derive from the argument from personal experience. I get that people believe their experiences, and it's hard to shake off the argument from personal experience, but personal revelations cannot be shared with other people, and the person who thinks these experiences prove God also assumes that their interpretation of their experience is infallible. That they cannot see other explanations for these experiences is often the problem, because they don't want to interpret these experiences any other way than what they already have. So you're right not to bring them up as the main one or the main arguments because of bias of personal interpretation factors. You don't recognize these problems per se, but I'm glad you're not bringing them up because you, as far as other people, and as far as other people are concerned, they are not good proof of any kind of faith claim. Even to the person who's had the experiences, they're not actual proof. They're just a recognition of their own bias towards interpreting things a certain way. And I'm glad we kind of recognize that they're just not really good proof for God to other people. But then you make a very bold claim indeed, that somehow the Catholic has proofs for God that are better than others. That's because these proofs that the belief in God is not the result of wishful thinking or logical fallacies. I want everybody to make a note of those two things because it's going to be interesting as we go through the video as to whether or not you live up to this claim. But rather, you say that these proofs are so ironclad that Catholic philosophical proofs for God are so good that no one can escape the logical philosophical conclusion that there is a God. I hope there's something new that I haven't heard before, but given past experience, I'm not holding my breath in anticipation. But let's begin.
The first type, the cosmological argument, is probably the most famous and the strongest of the arguments. Looking into the universe, or cosmos, we notice a relationship between all in the created order. There are patterns that develop, motion is visible, and contingencies that arise. What this argument proposes is that if there is anything that is now that wasn't before, there must be something that caused it. For an example, we can look to St. Thomas Aquinas' second proof, referred to as the proof of first cause or efficient cause. We know that if something, A, exists, it did not create itself, but was created by something else, B. If B doesn't exist, then A cannot exist either. But this also applies to B, meaning that there must be a cause C for B and a cause D for C, and so on. To repeat this process infinitely would not make any sense, for there must be a first cause. And the only way for this to be true is if there is a being that is causality itself, existing outside of time and space in pure actuality. In other words, God. You might think of it in more practical terms. Why do you exist? Well, because your parents made you. Why do they exist? Because their parents made them. And so on, and so on. But when would this stop? Before every being, there is something that caused it to come into being, including the Big Bang itself. Everything in existence may have existed in a super dense mass before exploding into everything that is, but what caused that mass to explode, and how did that matter come to exist in the first place? Why is there something rather than nothing? There must be a first cause, and the only explanation for this would be a being that has always existed and was never caused by anything else. We call that being God. St. Thomas uses this line of thinking for three of his other arguments, namely for motion, contingency, and gradation, all pointing to the illogical nature of an infinite regress, to prove that there must be an ultimate mover, cause, necessity, or standard by which everything else exists.
Well, I think I've heard this one before and stated better, but here are the assumptions you still haven't proven with all of your talk. You still haven't proven these assumptions. The question could be asked, why is God the only possibility for the first cause, and why is it in an infinite regress impossible? The fact is, this argument just postulates that the first cause has to be personal, infinite, and powerful, and none of that is necessarily true. There could be other explanations. There is really no good argument why a first cause must be personal. That's a pretty big assumption, as many causes are not personal, and so the selection of this criteria is arbitrary without demonstration in the cosmological argument, no matter who gives it. Some causes also are not infinite, nor are they all powerful, as a small action can lead to big results, and some causes are temporary. You haven't really proven why this has to be the case. So some causes are not infinite, nor are they powerful. And why can't the first cause simply this be the first domino tripped over, so to speak? I have never found the reasons for these ideas convincing when other people that have given them, and you pretty much are doing the same thing. As for the infinite regress, I have noted that the argument of this possibility has come a long way since the medieval days of the various saints that you're presenting here. And the jury is now out as to whether an infinite regress is a possibility, but such is the nature of philosophy, as I don't think it really proves anything without scientific evidence to back it up, which you already admitted or conceded that it doesn't exist.
But what if we don't want to look to the world, we want to think about God in God's self? For that, we can look to St. Anselm's ontological argument. For Anselm, it is a logical fact that if there is a God, he must be greater than anything else that can be conceived. If we could conceive of something greater, then that would be God's, not the first thing. Since we're able to state this, we know that God exists, at the very least, in our minds. But if God only exists in our minds, then the idea existing in reality would be greater than our conception of God, but there can be nothing greater than God. Therefore, God must exist in reality. In other words, the very idea of God necessitates God's existence. For some, this might sound like a mind trick or some wishful thinking. Surely thinking about unicorns doesn't make them exist. But that's not what Anselm is getting at. What this argument does is less convert atheists into theists, and more ground our understanding of God logically, helping us to understand the nature of God. If God is that than which nothing greater can be thought, then God must be omnipotent, omnipresent, all-loving, and completely sufficient in himself. God is not just some powerful wizard in the sky or some Santa Claus-like figure. for these things have limitations and potentialities. The point he is trying to make is that God is not like other creatures, finite, weak, filled with potential. God is by his very nature perfect. And so, rather than prove God outright, this proof helps to guide Christian theology away from illogical conceptions of God. To believe in, say, a God that didn't care about the world would be a self-defeating conception of God, and so cannot exist.
So the ontological argument. The problem is, I do think it's a Jedi mind trick, or at least a Christian mind trick. Anselm is gauged in pure grade A theology, so you're right about that this argument doesn't prove God so much as form a basis for thinking about God theologically in terms of all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-loving. Its main flaw is not acknowledging that just because one can think about something doesn't suddenly make that something exist. It is actually the heart and soul of wishful thinking about God, and so your claim that these arguments are not about wishful thinking is pretty much shot at this point, because this argument itself is wishful thinking on steroids. Trust me, thinking about something made it exist, the world would be a very different place, and I don't see any reason why I should make a special exception for God. Also, I have heard this stated before, so nothing unique here. Using the idea of logical and common conceptions about the Amagab is laughable, as ideas that come out of this become the basis for arguments against such a God's existence. The problem from evil, for instance, jumps right out at us the moment we postulate an all-loving and all-powerful God, plus many others. All the ontological argument is a mind trick, and that it asks me to believe in mind magic, that I think about something, so therefore it must exist in reality. It's not a good argument, and the Jedi, and quite frankly, the Jedi mind trick is better. And this leads to a disturbing conclusions and not helpful ones when you consider the fact that it is the basis for theology, and all of a sudden we have this all-powerful, all-knowing, all-loving God that comes out of this greatest possible being argument, and all of a sudden now we have a ton more logical inconsistencies and fallacies regarding those ideas about God. So you postulated that this wouldn't be wishful thinking and that you don't believe in stuff by wishful thinking or logical fallacies, and here you are engaged in the argument that is pretty much wishful thinking and leads to not only is a logical fallacy in many cases itself, but leads to others. So once again, not a really good argument.
Of course, there are other logical ways of conceiving of God beyond deduction and abstract concepts. We can also look to human nature and propose what are called moral arguments. When we look to human nature across time and space, there is quite a bit of diversity, yes, but strikingly, there is a lot of similarity as well. In every culture, cold-blooded killing is immoral. In every people, rape is an abomination. In every society, theft is outlawed. Is this because everyone's read their Bible and learned these moral truths? Highly unlikely. Given the diversity of time and place, given the fact that some of these cultures existed before the commandments were even written or had no contact with the outside world, the fact that these truths are held universally shows that they were not taught, but rather exist innately in human nature. There is something within us that just knows these things are wrong. No one had to tell us. And if that's the case, if there are moral truths that exist in nature universally, meaning that they were not written or prescribed by humans, then there must be an intelligent, moral being that fashioned the way the world is. There must be a God who writes these truths on our hearts. Now, some will undoubtedly point out that there are some individuals in our world that disagree with these precepts, and even more that blatantly ignore them. This does not disprove the existence of natural law, but merely points to the disobedience and ignorance of some in humanity. Individuals will fall short of any moral code. That doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. When we see a near universal acceptance of certain truths across language and culture, there can only be one answer. God made it that way.
Is cold-blooded killing immoral in every culture? I mean, I realize this is the moral argument that some things are universal, but some cultures create religious notions that killing those outside the religious tribe is considered an act of service to God. As for rape, if I look at both the Bible and the modern world, the Bible itself justifies rape in certain circumstances, like war brides that are spoils of war. Those virgin girls that are spared after God orders genocide, that they can be taken by the soldiers that took them as a prize. But even today, our women are subject to arranged marriages where the wedding night is not exactly consensual, and it is considered morally okay in many cultures. I am not convinced of any universal morality, which is a big assumption in this argument, because universal implies every single person would possess this morality. The thing is, you then mention here that there might be similar moral principles among different cultures, but seem to think no one else told us. I don't think that is true, as right from the get-go, our parents and our society are telling us what is right and wrong. It's not necessarily completely inherent. When it comes to morality, part of it may be our human empathy, and another part of it may be how we're raised. There might be some sense of moral empathy that we have as humans that is universal, but how to shape is very dependent on our nurture of our society. It is a big jump in logic to say something fashioned all this outside of us that you don't demonstrate actually exists. The fact that is we are agency of our own moral codes, and no God is required to say that. We create moral codes out of the necessity of being a moral species. I mean, you kind of say that there's a moral sense that inherent to every human. As to how come this isn't the reason why that we have this universal moral sense and we suddenly jump to a God, I don't know, because you never demonstrate why we should. And how we evolved as a human species may have a lot more to do with our morality and not have anything to do with a God at all. It's interesting that in this part you make at the end of your argument, where you talk about universal morality until you introduce the word near and make it near universal instead. This actually weakens your case, and by the fact that you're acknowledging exceptions, it's not universal anymore. Okay, you're trying to push it. It's almost universal. It's almost this. It's almost that. There's a few outliers, but they don't really count. And that's hand waving. You're hand waving those outliers away. The problem is the moment you say the word near universal, you open the crack for no God being necessary at that point, because the moral argument has to prove two things. One, that objective morality exists, and the other, it also has to prove that there's an absolute necessary connection between the existence of God and morality. But the moment you introduce that crack, it's no longer necessary. Hand-waving the outliers is not a good explanation, and that is all really you have here. Asserting over and over there can be only one answer, God, is the problem with the moral argument's one premise, that proof is never offered for which there's a necessary connection between God and objective morality. And you haven't proven objective morality exists because you even kind of admit it when you go from saying universal morality to near universal morality. So which is it? You haven't proven God is necessary for it, and you haven't proven that it exists. You just assert it like everybody else.
And for what purpose? Why do we exist? To answer that question, we must conclude with our fourth and final proof, teleological arguments. When you think about the complexity of our world, the nature of subatomic particles, the depth of the human brain, how delicate life is in this universe and yet it thrives, and then consider the astronomical number of factors that had to be in place for each to develop over a course of 14 billion years, it seems improbable, to say the least, that they happened by accident. You're telling me that we exist simply by chance? Those are some long odds.
It's a common apologistic tactic to throw this idea of chance or accident into it. But people who are naturalists, who look at the natural world and look for natural explanations, don't believe anything happens by chance. They do believe in cause and effect. And I think there's no chance in it. And as much as it sometimes becomes inevitable that certain things are going to happen, it's actually not that astronomical of odds. It only seems that way when you think there was only one chance for all of this to have happened. But at every single step on the way, there are millions upon millions of possibilities, not just one, that could lead to the same conclusion. So when you take something, for instance, like evolution or anything else, it's not just that at a certain point only one chance existed for this thing to come about. There were millions of chances over and over. Let me give you an example. A drop of rain landing in your tongue if you stick it out during a rainstorm, if calculated individually, is long odds. But consider the drop of rain will fall into a space multiple times, that a rain cloud drops thousands drop over a large area, then the odds of those drops landing on your tongue becomes much, much better. It starts to reduce for every drop that would hit that spot, every drop that fits this large area wherever you could stand. The problem with this argument then is that A, it's mislabeling what people who believe in natural descriptive law are saying and is trying to call that chance when we look at scientific inquiry, and a misunderstanding of how odds work and probability work that just happen to go down one way. No, there were multiple chances at every step of the way that it could happen, so not just one. This significantly reduces the odds. And the fact that something is improbable doesn't mean it's impossible, but the odds aren't actually all that bad. In fact, I'm starting to conclude, the more that I study this stuff, that given the right conditions, life is inevitable and not necessarily the product of God, it's the product of natural forces. This doesn't demonstrate the impossibility of something given the long odds, but how you are misunderstanding probability and are mischaracterizing those who believe in natural processes. You're saying that this is poor odds, and that just shows that you don't understand how probability works either.
The universe is more than a random collection of atoms. It has order, intelligibility, beauty, and even purpose. There is no way that all of this is the result of mere randomness. Christians conclude that there must be a source of the intelligence, a being that is all-knowing and all-powerful. God. The most famous of these arguments is the watchmaker. When you look to the many gears and components that make up a watch, there is no way that the universe could have randomly produced it. It requires that there be an intelligent creator. But there are more sophisticated versions of this argument as well. When we look to the natural world and see even inanimate, unintelligent things acting with some intelligible pattern or towards a particular end, it follows that there must be an intelligent end by which everything was created and toward which everything is oriented. Beyond just an argument of design, like the watchmaker, this sort of argument implies more than just intelligibility, but purpose. The things we see do not simply reveal some order in the universe, they bear witness to why they exist in the first place. In this way, the entire universe can be explained by a single, intelligent, purposeful being that calls all things into existence and draws all things to himself. That can only be God.
The watchmaker argument is flawed logical because it uses a double definition of the universe. Is first of all, the nature of the universe is undesigned when comparing it with the watch, but all of a sudden it flips to being designed when comparing it to a need for a designer. So you put a double premise in there: nature is designed, and then or undesigned, and then you turn right around and then say it's designed. Which is it? It's a nice flip, but it means you created two premises that contradict each other in the argument. That's why the watchmaker argument is illogical and is fallacious, has a logical fallacy to it, which you claimed at the beginning of the video you didn't have any of these. It's the conclusion that all of this requires an intelligent creator also that is problematic. It's an assertion given without evidence, and then the exclusion of many other explanations that are offered. There are others who would give you alternative explanations that are scientific, that don't require a God. None of what you said requires a God. Seeing pattern in things is a survival trait that helps with predictability. Does the world have design and we see it? Or do we give it patterns to understand it better as pattern-seeking and being pattern-seeking animals is what we are? You are using the former and not addressing the possibility of the latter, which is also valid, in fact, probably more valid. You continue to assert there's only one explanation for this, and that either shows your ignorance of these alternative explanations, or you're dismissing them without addressing them, which is dishonest. The argument from purpose also is intuitive and not logical. It appeals to desire, not intellect. It has never worked for me because I see it for what it is. It assumes purpose must be eternal in order to be meaningful, and that doesn't account for reality where we have something that has significant purpose for a temporary time frame.
At least, that's what Christians say. You might not be convinced, which is why, ultimately, in discussions like this, it's important to make two things abundantly clear. The world is filled with evidence for the existence of God, and our minds are capable of logically understanding it, and even the most rational of arguments will not convert some people who have not received the gift of faith. While it is true that the First Vatican Council taught that God can be known with certainty by the natural light of human reason, the Church has never posited that reason alone is enough to know God. Thus, there will be many who will look to these arguments without the light of faith and be unconvinced. Instead, what they offer us as Christians is not a weapon to use against our enemies, but immensely helpful tools to give reason and logic to what we already know and see in the world. They show to us and the world that what we believe is not the result of wishful thinking or the whims of a cult leader, but are grounded in a logical, reasonable, and nearly irrefutable view of the world.
So if I don't accept these arguments as I recognize the logical flaws in them and the wishful thinking in them, then I just have not seen how rationality they are because I have not received the gift of faith. So your end argument is that if we don't agree with these being logical and not wishful thinking, that we're just being incredulous. That must be a nice ego trip for yourself, because maybe the Jedi robe is going to your head on how powerful faith and how good these arguments are, because from my perspective, they all possess logical fallacies and are logical fallacy examples that I would use in a logic class. In addition, one of them is literally, if you wishfully think long enough, God will be real because you think he is. And that's literally an argument from wishful thinking. So what can I conclude? So in the end, I think we can draw a few conclusions, though, that none of these arguments that you presented are irrefutable. And the fact, as have been debunked by so many other people like myself, that it's ridiculous. And as to how many times critics of them show their illogical inconsistencies and flaws. So you come to the end that these arguments don't actually prove anything. So basically you're saying, so just believe and rationalize your faith with these arguments because these aren't really having the value of proving God exists. But if you already have the gift of faith, then these arguments will prove that God exists. I guess I agree that there's a lot of question-begging rationalization and wishful thinking if you turned in, like, say, the ontological argument, which is the ultimate form of this thought. But also all these arguments then just become props and crutches for something that you already believe. They aren't good arguments for the existence of God, but really good rationalizations for the existence of God if you already believe. I agree with you that that is what they are. What they also are is logically fallacious and wishful thinking in and of themselves, with one being the ultimate form of wishful thinking, the ontological argument. So it does very much fit well with the idea of faith, because faith is, in my opinion, wishful thinking itself. Number 3, why is faith necessary if the things can be rationally acquired? For the rational-minded, faith would not be necessary. But you're saying that rationality doesn't matter at all unless faith is present first. How much pride this must give you with that you are special, that God chose you to have this special faith and not others. I don't see things as you do, then I lack something that you have. I don't think that works, okay? I think I have skepticism, and my skepticism and my understanding of how the world works indicates that most of these arguments are crap, and they are wishful thinking. In summary, what you're basically saying, these are not actually convincing or logical arguments. This is what you're saying at the end by your own admission, but just rather a way to reinforce your own cognitive bias, which you call faith. You're already dealing with confirmation bias, which is what faith is, and then you just use these arguments to reinforce your bias. You're basically admitting this. Finally, and as some sort of final word to this whole video, it seems strange to me that you make the claim about how the Catholic version of these would be so much better, or you have Catholic arguments that make it even better. But when I looked at all of these, there's nothing special about them that I haven't heard somewhere else in some variation. Just because some of the saints came up with these first doesn't mean they have special powers that other versions don't, particularly when all the versions seem to kind of be the same. You make Catholic Christianity simple. This just makes Catholic Christianity simply, first among equals based on chronology, but nothing more. So, in summary, I don't think Mr. Casey really helped his cause here. The robes are nice. I always, once again, I think it's pretty cool that, Catholics get to cosplay Jedis all the time. But at the same time, this was kind of disappointing because the buildup at the beginning didn't become what it was at the end. And Casey actually kind of admits this, that these arguments only really are not logically fallacious and not wishful thinking to somebody that already believes. But it doesn't change the fact that every single one of these has some sort of logical inconsistencies. Now, I didn't hit everything in this video, just some of the high points of why I don't accept them. But I've done other videos on, trying to help the apologist out with these arguments where I've taken on each one of these arguments in and of itself. And every single one of them failed. And, the test of logic. And I felt that the ontological argument is a justification of wishful thinking. So, sorry, Father Casey, you just didn't really convince me. But then again, you have faith and I don't. And, that just makes you special. It's the ego trip that really bothers me sometimes from people that are supposed to be clergy in an area where that's supposed to humble you and make you a servant of God. But really, whenever I hear Catholics do this or Catholics get in my comments with this kind of stuff, it really just makes you sound arrogant, okay? It sounds like you have placed yourself on the pedestal above all other Christians because you have the true Christianity. The thing about true Christianity that I still have to ask is, if there's a true Christianity that people would never leave, why are people leaving every single form of Christianity? Why are they deconverting from every form of Christianity? It seems if the argument that if you just had the right Christianity was true, there would be one form of Christianity where people don't leave it because it's so obviously true that nobody would. But I think every single type of Christianity people leave from. And that doesn't seem, logically consistent with the idea of having, if we had the right form of Christianity, we'd have been okay. And I don't know, faith seems to be a little bit of wishful thinking in and of itself. So there you have it. Well, I'd be interested in your thoughts on this video. So thanks everybody for stopping by. All your likes, shares, and subscribes. Leave a comment if you have any other thoughts about it. And I want to give a special shout out to my members. Thank you, all my citizens and Rabyd citizens. You are what to make this channel work. Thank you. Your support is greatly appreciated, both practically and emotionally. Thank you. And as always, live your best life. You only get one go around and then it's over. And so you want to spend all your time, money, and opportunities on things that build up yourself, the relationships that you have with people that you love and care for, and to make this a better world. And don't waste it on the trappings of religion and faith, even though it might allow you to wear a cool Jedi robe, because that's a dead end. And as always, thanks for stopping by, and I'll catch you next time.